Hello again, and welcome back to Quarantography. I bet no one told you life was gonna be this way. We have fun. Today I'm going to be talking about the number one exercise you need to do over and over and over again if you're going to learn lighting on your own. I've done this for years, and once you start doing it, it's going to change the way you look at everything. What it is what I'm calling reverse engineering light. Now, what that means is looking at a photo, asking yourself how it was lit, and trying to match it later. We're only going to be covering the first two parts of that today, and only with a very limited scope, but I will be returning to this topic in later videos and different examples. So please reach out. I'd love to see the images that you are puzzling over. Send those in, and I'd be happy to make a video deconstructing that particular image. But lighting is, while infinitely complex, made up of some very simple puzzle pieces. There are a few common ways to modify a light that will show up over and over again and are a really helpful touchstone when you're trying to break down an image into its constituent parts. Today I'm going to be showing you some examples based on one of the most common paradigms in portrait photography specifically, which is the medium softbox. The medium softbox is generally a pretty flattering light, but it can also be quite moody, and the lighting example I'm going to be giving you is a little bit on the moody side, but that's just so you can kind of more easily see the differences that head position and light position make. I say head position, this is a callback to our very first episode, Subject Over Everything, because the face is a really complicated piece of topography. Every ridge and hole and pore casts its own shadow, and that's one of the interesting challenges about photography. A lighting scheme that works well for one person won't necessarily work as well for the next, so it's always a bit of a puzzle there. What's more, a lighting scheme that works well for one person at a certain angle won't necessarily work the same way if they just tilt their head slightly differently. That's one of the most fascinating parts of this puzzle. The exercise is find an image you love. Look at it, look at where the shadows fall, where the highlights fall, and ask yourself where that light might be placed. If the shadows are softer, it's going to be a larger light source, and if the shadows are hard, it's going to be a small light source. But outside of that, don't get too in your head about what exact light they're using. You can get there about 90% of the way most of the time by just picking whether you're using a small or a large light source. The real magic is in placement and posing. So I'm going to go into the studio, I'm going to set up a key light in a softbox, a fill light, and I'm going to open up the photos I take and describe the parts of the photo that jump out to me that are giving me the kind of clues you need to reverse engineer the light. The things that jump out to me, that call out to me, that say, hey, I think the light is over there. And once you have these kind of basic tools, you can start trying to make your own version of an image that you've seen before. You can start trying to light your image in a way that resembles an image you've already seen. And if you can do that over and over again, you are putting tools in your toolbox that you can access later. And that's just the part of practice that really has a major effect on the photography you make. So let's go to the studio. So I'm just going to breeze through the studio stuff real quick. Most of the detail I want to speak to, I'm going to do in my screen share next. But just so you can see what I've done here, I've got a hard light on axis fill there. I put a quarter CTO into my softbox, and I'm just going to sit there on that Apple box. There's the fill only. There's me getting my key right, trying every angle there. This is the top-down look. Slight angle. Top-down again. From below. And 90-degree look. So here I am in Photo Mechanic. This is one of my favorite programs for very quickly looking at and organizing images. This is just the fill light, just for your reference. If you watched my What's the Deal with Fill Light episode, you'll recognize this as the hard light on-axis fill. I'm a fan of it. It shows up in a lot of interesting places, and as you can see, it's kind of harsh, so it adds this texture to the image. You can always tell a hard light on-axis fill by looking at the eyes and seeing this one little dot right in the center. This is interesting here. But pay attention to the eyes. When you are deconstructing light like this, the eyes are a really great tool because they reflect back the shape and size of the light. So moving on. Here's our base shot with the key at about 45 degrees off camera left. So I've really just put enough fill light so that the shadows aren't pure black. And I'm using a nice soft key. It's a medium softbox. This is one of the more common lighting scenarios in photography. I've gelled it warm because I believe in gelling key lights warm. If you're not sure why, take a look at my mimicking sunlight tutorial. That explains a lot of the reasoning behind why I gel my key warm. Even if I'm not technically mimicking sunlight, having a low key is always going to kind of make our brains think of sunsets, so I like to warm it up a little bit. So when you're reverse engineering light, the things to pay attention to are the shadows. Shadows are going to be the main thing that gives away the game when it comes to figuring out what the light is. Shadows and eyes, as I said before. As you can see here, you can pretty much see the light in my eyes. This big rectangle gives it away. It's a softbox. And that's super helpful. As to the position, or if you can't see the reflection in the eyes, this is where you start getting a little bit more sleuthy. You gotta start looking at the shadows, because every object casts a shadow when it is lit like this. A face is a really wonderful learning tool because every facial feature casts a shadow, and every shadow is a clue. The nose is one of the biggest ones. If you look here, the ridge of the nose is going to be the dividing line between where light hits and where light doesn't hit. And the fact that it's not on this side tells you a lot about where the light is. It's on this side, but not on this side. So obviously the light is going to be on the right side of frame. The ridge of the nose is most deeply blocking the other side of the nose. That makes sense. But some of it is making it over and getting to this cheek. Other cues to pay attention to are this little hard shadow here. That's actually a situation where not only is the main ridge of the nose blocking this area, but this secondary bump here is casting its own secondary shadow right here on the cheek. Other little things to look at, the bag of my left eye here is casting its own shadow. This bump is casting this shadow. I'm gonna move on. This is the same light, but I've turned my head. Suddenly, everything on my face is illuminated. This is a form of broad lighting. Because the light is now between my nose and the camera, the light is fully filling in my nose, it is fully filling in my eyes, and now the only things casting shadows are my jawline, my neck bulge, and my ears. For those of you peeping fill light, you can see here that my hard on-axis fill light is casting these little specular highlights inside my ears. But the key is not touching anything past here because my face and my ear and my neck are all blocking the light. Now when I turn my head the other way, the lighting scheme changes completely. This is technically a broad light, even though it's very moody. Light's still coming from here, but here, think about what's casting shadows again. The broad side of my cheek here is blocking light from fully reaching my eye crevice. This dark area is in shadow from my eye socket. This dark part of my cheek is being blocked by this bright part. And once again, ears are a really great place to look for lighting clues. The outside ridge here is being lit while the inside ridge is in shadow. Lit, shadow, lit, shadow. And even once again, neck bulges here, lit, shadow. All this is telling you light off to the right. Meanwhile, this part of my face is completely in shadow. And once again, same light. If I turn my face entirely to the side, now nothing is in the light. Only the back of my neck, the side of my face. But if I turn my face the other way, lighting seems completely different. It's a completely different vibe. And your intuition might tell you that it was lit completely differently. But all it's changed is the subject's head position, which is really interesting. And it tells you that lighting is relative. And it really comes back to my first lesson here about subject and how you interact with it being the most important thing. Because even a slight different cock of the head can drastically alter the way your lighting reads. So here, once again, fully broad light. Here I've turned my head almost completely around. We still have fully broad light. The only shadow, once again, is where my big ear is casting its own little shadow here. Here's an interesting one. In this image, I've turned my face to be directly on axis to the key. It's hitting both sides of my nose equally. So the only shadows you're seeing on my nose are kind of where the reflectance of the skin changes a little bit. So we know, like, because light is hitting my cheek in this angle and coming towards the camera, it's a little shinier from that angle, whereas it's hitting at a more oblique angle in the nose and bouncing off to the left. The light is filling in most of my ear, except for the area where my cheek is blocking it. So it can be helpful to kind of picture yourself standing where the light is, and kind of shooting rays out from your eyes and trying to hit different parts of the face. And in this situation, you could picture yourself being off to the right of me, and my cheek blocking the rays, trying to reach this part of the ear, but hitting here. And if you can picture yourself that way, you can do that exercise while you're placing your lights and get exactly the look you want to get. Here I am straight on. Because this is the angle of our face that we're most familiar with from mirrors, this is perhaps one of the easiest angles to reverse engineer. We can easily see now that the nose here is casting a shadow. Quick side note about that, when there's a nose casting the shadow, joining a side of the face shadow here, but leaving a little hole for the eye, a little hole of light for the eye, that's what's called Rembrandt lighting, named after the painter. But because the light is still at a 45-degree angle off, things are casting shadows here. You're getting a little bit from this ridge of this cheek casting here. If I had higher cheekbones, it might be stronger. But overall, you can just kind of see how the nose is the dividing line here. Mostly blocking, except for this little area where the nose joins the face. It's not blocking as much, and that's where this Rembrandt hole comes from. Once I turn my face camera left, this is interesting because it's technically broad lighting. And broad lighting has an association with kind of less moody looks. But we still have the light off to the right, but things are starting to cast their own shadows. This bag of my eye here is casting a dark shadow here. My nose is casting the entire camera left side of my face into darkness. And you can start seeing the ear casting its own shadows here. And then from behind, almost everything in shadow, except for the ear once again flagging off this big swath of light. This is one more thing I wanted to show you. It's the same lighting scheme, basically, except for the light is a little bit closer to camera. I'd say a little bit, 20 degrees instead of 45. And you can still see the same things happening. The nose dividing the face up. You can see where the Rembrandt lighting would start happening if it started moving a little bit. There's this little diagonal, this little check mark happening here. And how the left side of the face is darker than the right. And then if you get really close, you can see the light. There's the fill, there's the key. Same lighting scheme, except my face is turned to the other side of the light, so this is very broad lighting. It's hitting every part of my face, and all the shadows are invisible to the camera. But all I have to do is turn my head the other direction, and suddenly shadows are getting cast. One other thing here to show you, I moved the light at 90 degrees to the camera, just straight off to the right. And you can see what this does. It's at the same power level, but it seems brighter because of the way skin reflectance works. It's at this kind of perfect angle to bounce the light directly back at the camera, a great deal of the light. The more direct your light is towards the camera, is that if I move this further back to the back of the room, it's going to bounce off more directly into your lens. And it's going to make the reflectance of whatever you're shooting more direct. So it's going to seem brighter and shinier. But you can still see a little bit of that eye. So you know it's not completely behind me. some part of that light is making it through that little hole caused by the nose. Same 90-degree light again, with my head faced the other direction. As you can see, almost all of it is in shadow except for the nose, which is just big enough to poke out past the ridge my cheek is forming. Next, using the same light, but in a different position, this is a toppy light. This is, as you can see in the eyes, above me and facing downwards. This is an interesting one. I like it a lot. You see it in a lot of classic beauty work, especially, and it is a very nice light. The hallmarks of this one for me are the way that the eyes are hooded. You can kind of see the dark space underneath the eyebrows here. And the toppy light here is about here. But if you move it a little closer to the subject, you can get to the point where you actually lose this catch light entirely, and that's not usually ideal. Catch lights are very nice. But basically what's happening is the eyebrows are shading your eyes so much that your eyes don't get any light. If you think an image has toppy light, definitely check under the eyes for this darkness, and that'll be a pretty good tip. The same thing happens underneath the nose. You see the bright ridge here and this dark area under here. That is a pretty good giveaway. That light is only coming from the top. Even the tops of these nostril ridges, you're getting a little highlight here that tells you it's being lit from above, not from below. You see a little on the ears. Under the chin is completely dark. That's a good giveaway. Here's what I was talking about with the hooded eyes. Just by turning my chin downwards, the ridge of my eyebrows has blocked that light. And now the only catch light I have is from the fill, which is kind of an odd look. If I turn my head, here you can tell, once again, the eyes are still hooded a little bit. Underneath the nose is still a very good giveaway there. And the way the ear is casting the shadows, it's got this nice bright highlight on top, but underneath the shadows. This is both toppy and camera right. And this one you can kind of tell mostly because the nose is casting this diagonal shadow that's a little bit more down than it is left. There's a little bit of that from the chin as well. And here's a fun example. This shows up more than you think it might. This is from below. I've mentioned it before, it's kind of the horror movie light. But what you actually see this a lot in is in outdoor on a sunny day photography. If you are shooting somebody outside on a white sidewalk or a light colored sidewalk, you'll often see, and this is the hallmark for me, this under the nose lighting. Basically there's this big bounce happening from the sun, just brightening up, shooting directly up on your subject. And depending on how intense it is, it can be either a nice fill or this horror movie effect. So just be cognizant of that. Under lighting from below, I always look out for this under the nose brightness, this little shadow popping up from the ridge of your nostrils, and just how fully smooth my under eye is. Usually there's a little shade there, and here it's just weirdly smooth. But you can also just see little interesting forehead ridges here, and the bottom of my face is completely shading the top of my head. Once again, you can check the ear. There's a shadow on top, very unusual. That tells you it's being lit from below. If I tilt my head up, you can get an extra good view of this under nose. If I turn my head to the side, once again, the ear is going to be a good example there. Here the ridge of the cheekbone is blocking the inner cheek area. And that's about as far as I want to go today. So those are the impressions that I got looking at just this very simple lighting setup and the features of my own face, which I'm very sick of looking at. This is only part one. There are going to be more parts of this particular video in the future. What I'd really like is for you to send me some images that are baffling you or that just make you go, how do I do that? And I will make an episode based on that image, if I like it. If you're a member of our Patreon, I strongly recommend you reach out on our Discord. I am in there, I am open to questions, and I'd love to discuss any questions you have about my images, your images, someone else's images, and there's a pretty good chance that if we discuss something along the lines of reverse engineering light, it may end up in a future video. So that's kind of cool. If you're not a member of our Patreon yet, please subscribe. Every little bit helps, and I really do my best to make sure it feels like the community is worth the money. It's not a lot. If you like the video, of course, like, subscribe, do all that stuff. I'm gonna keep making these videos 3 times a week. I'd love to hear from you. And until next time, stay safe, stay sane, stay inside, stay shooting. Thank you.